We're in the skies once again with Airport 77, but not for long. A mid-air heist goes awry and the plane ends up submerged underwater, deep in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. You can't say it's not completely different from the first two entries in the series, so let's get diving. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Excuse me, I don't mean to intrude, but could you move your ass, dear?
This is a movie podcast. We are working through the Airport franchise this season on Collector's Cut, and this is the third entry today, and that is Airport 77. So,
yes.
We'll get into everything, but yeah, start spoiler free as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get into the spoilers, and if you're enjoying the show, do hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch, and of course you can get bonus content by supporting us on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. So, one of the things I said about Airport 75 is that, you know, regardless of your feelings on it or the previous one, is that you couldn't deny that the premise, while it's been centered around a plane, was very different. And I said that it sounded like Airport 77 was again going to be very different from the previous two. I think you'd agree with that statement.
Yeah, I am in awe. Maybe just looking back with a modern eye where it feels like everything's the same over and over again. But I am gobsmacked by how many different ways this series manages to take an airplane and put it in danger, and yet somehow still put it under the same label of airport.
Yeah, it's, you know, once again, we've got an ensemble cast. A few big names are mixed in there. George Kennedy's back, although it's basically a cameo this time, to be honest.
I was going to say, George Kennedy as, well, he was the only one who was in both the first two.
Well, it's funny, because in the first movie, I'd say he's a fairly minor character, and then in the second movie, he gets sort of bumped up to being like, oh, no, that's second lead. That's maybe a bit disingenuous, but he's like a lot more on the adventure. He's kind of like more involved. He's getting into things. Here, he's kind of there for a couple of dialogue scenes, and that's about it.
Yeah,
So,
that's how I also feel about Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart is here just so they could put Jimmy Stewart on the poster.
which I kind of expected, to be fair.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen Jimmy Stewart at this age before.
Yeah, same. I thought, I don't know why, but for some reason, I have his last role in like the mid to early 90s, somewhere around that time. And this struck me as the age he would be at there. So I'm curious what he looked like in the mid to early 90s if he already looks this old here.
Yeah, I don't think I'd seen him in anything that was maybe older than the late 60s, perhaps. So I just never seen him as a like, he never looked like a young man, really. Like, he always had a bit of a older gentleman kind of look to him. But here he's actually pretty old. He's literally a grandfather in this movie, which makes sense. He's that age, but it was just kind of fun. But his voice sounds exactly like Jimmy Stewart. I almost didn't recognize him at first, but then he started speaking and I'm like, oh, that's Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, they're just like, sir, would you do an interview? And I'm like, who's this guy? And then he goes, well, here's the thing. And I'm like, oh, hi, Jimmy.
But yeah, I mean, I expected him to be that kind of cameo. It felt like that type of thing for this sort of movie.
I mean, based off of how IMDb lists the cast where he is literally dead last, yes. But I think there is a plot where he is more involved. Especially in a movie like this, where theoretically you could get a character away with sitting in a seat for the entire movie just screaming.
Sure. But we do also have Jack Lemmon, who's the captain of the plane. We got Christopher Lee in here. There's a few other faces that I couldn't have told you the names off the top of my head, but I do recognize their faces from other things. Joseph Cotten's in here as a character. I know him as the villain from Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, which he was much younger in, because that was like 1948, give or take. So obviously he's much older here than he was in that. And there's a few other faces. Actually, I was really getting bugged because the co-pilot, I saw his face and I'm like, oh god, I know that from somewhere. What is this guy in? I finally found it. It turned out he's in The Omen 2, and that's what I knew him from.
Oh, okay.
But I knew his face from something, and it was really bugging me. But yeah, so those are the ones that stuck out to me specifically. But yeah, I'm sure a bunch of these actors have been in various things, especially around this time period.
I mean, this is especially with all of the other disaster films going on, this is where they're really just hooking in and getting all of the stars they can to just show up for even like a fraction of a second.
Yeah. Oh, and then the other one, Emmett Walsh is in this. He plays a doctor. He is in Blade Runner, and he's in Blood Simple, and a few other things. If you've seen those movies, you'll definitely spot him, because it's not even that long before those movies. You know, it's only, less than a decade before those two. So he's still pretty recognizable in this. So
apparently, the woman, the rich woman, Karen, she's also from The Omen 2. Did you not recognize her? She's Anne Thorne.
Now that you're saying it, I can picture it, but I actually did not recognize her, no.
Yeah. Because I'm just clicking through. I'm like, oh, hey, that one looks familiar.
Her name is Karen. Oh, she is such a Karen. That's actually quite funny.
I never realized. Definition.
Yeah, I never realized that was her name, but she is. Like, I was actively hating her throughout the movie, thinking you're a damn Karen, and here
she's
it is.
Almost got the exact hairstyle too. It's uncanny.
She is grating to the ears.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the premise of this one is that it's actually more of a private plane that has been used to deliver a bunch of priceless paintings and artifacts and things like that to a museum owned by the guy who owns the airline that's built this plane, Mr. Stevens, which is Jimmy Stewart's character. And it does have a passenger set, because I actually thought early on it might not even have passengers, but it does have a kind of very first class passenger section that's very casual. There's a little bar. It's all...
Yeah, it seems like this the passenger list is basically coming with the paintings because there's going to be a party at the arrival.
Yes,
is more or less what it is.
So it's mostly, people who are of a fairly high wealth or stature for some reason or another who are on the plane. But there's a hijacking, of course, because some people want to steal all this stuff. However, the hijacking goes wrong and the plane ends up underwater. That's it. So I think at the end of the last one, I kind of joked, it's an airport movie, but it's actually more like an oil disaster movie. I was thinking Poseidon Adventure when I said that.
That was going through my head as I was watching this. I was like, especially there's a part very early on where they start like mapping out the plane. They show like, oh, here's where this room is, here's where this one is. And all I could think once they went underwater is like, now you have to go from the top to the bottom in order to get out at the very last moment because they're capsizing upside down.
And that's not exactly what happens, obviously, but yeah, that's what happened to Poseidon Adventure. So it was very different. Before we get into any like opinions on the quality of the movie, you can't argue the plot isn't a different type of swing.
Nope, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we have completely gotten away from airports in general, but yes, it is an airplane disaster. I'll give it that.
Yeah, that's the thing, because they leave from an airport, obviously, but there's no scenes at the airport after that. Like, it's all the Navy and like stuff like that are dealing with the rescue and try to find the plane and whatnot. So, but at this point, it's just the name of the franchise, so just roll with it.
I did especially note at the beginning of this, part of the hijackers' plan, as they show in the beginning, is they have to be dressed up as a pilot. Specifically so they can get past security.
Yeah,
we
what
finally
change?
Have security.
There was metal detectors. I saw them in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much has changed in 7 years?
Yeah, moving into the future.
Yeah, wild. Oh, I'll be honest, right? They show Pong at one point in this, and I was like, oh, hey, that's cutting edge for the time. But the one that actually impressed me is I did not realize it existed in 1977, is they whip out a laser disc. I did not know that was as early as the 70s.
Yeah, no, there was. That's the thing. They were always, when it comes to the video formats, like they were pushing it real hard, real fast. But it was always expensive. Like it was always really hard to make them. And it wasn't until VHS that was like, okay, now everybody can have it.
Yeah, because they whip out a laserdisc at one point to play. What I thought was going to be a movie for the flight, it ended up being like a little message from Jimmy Stewart to the passengers saying, "Hey, enjoy the flight on our fancy new plane."
I've got the dates on this. It says 1972 was the first public demonstration, but it didn't actually hit the market until 1978. So this may have just been like a little preview sort of thing where they were like, this is the technology that's coming, we're ready for it, we're showing it off in this movie.
It's meant to be, the plane's meant to be cutting edge with all the latest stuff. Like this is like, maybe people in 77 saw this in theaters and went, ooh, what's that?
Oh my god. And then 1 year later they go into the store like, oh, there it is, and it costs way too much.
$150 per movie. What?
All right, well, bye. Not to mention you got to buy the player first.
Yeah. Because she website and I'm like, wait, what is that? Because I imagine at the time people were like, wait, what's this shiny vinyl? What is this? Because that's kind of what it looks like. The laser disc is so big.
I'm curious. I have no reason to think this, but for some reason I feel like the actual like disc format of shininess, like not just like raised vinyl, I have to feel like there was something else before Laserdisc that looked like that, but I have nothing to back that up.
Maybe like the actual hard disk part of a hard disk and like old computers might have still, because I imagine they were still discs of some kind, but I mean I could be wrong. I really don't know.
Possibly. And plus how many, I mean they used a lot of magnetic tape back then too, so.
Yeah, it may have just been tape back then. Yeah, because, back then, like, a hard drive would be, like, 52 kilobytes, and it'd be the size of a fridge. So I don't know if there's a disk in there, or if it's just, I don't know, reams and reams of tape.
It's the equivalent of a chainsaw. If it ever breaks loose, it's cutting through everything.
Yeah, so, I do not know. I mean, CDs were around the same time, so I don't know what technically came first, CDs or Laserdisc, but obviously they're very similar looking, just different size.
Not sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so anyway, yeah. David, what did you think of Airport 77?
I liked it. So me and you got into a little tiff on the last one of I didn't like it as much as the first one, but that was kind of just going off of expectations of like what a disaster movie is to me. This one, I will say, I think I liked it a bit more than the second one even. But I will say that it has spikes for me. It has spikes where like it gets really, really interesting, and then there's very long periods where it feels like nothing is happening. And that's not to say that like it's not still somewhat engaging, but it definitely feels like a 2-hour runtime for this movie is a little bit bloated. I will say by the time we hit the third act, the back end of the movie, I think that it does a good job of keeping things consistently interesting. It's just the first half I have a little problem with. Beyond that, the last movie I wouldn't say chastised, but just kind of poked fun at the special effects, the way that it looked. It felt very cheap. This one, they broke out all the money. I don't know how they did it, if it was just miniatures or if they actually sunk a goddamn plane, but it looked great. So kudos to them on that. But yeah, I would say in general, probably not as good as the first one, but I do like it more than the second.
Yeah, I don't really know where I feel this places with the other two. I definitely like the second one a bit more. So, take that for what it's worth. Actually, I'm surprised to say, I mean, I guess you're talking about the plane being underwater and stuff, but there's definitely some shots of it flying where there was like some like almost cartoon clouds in the foreground.
Oh, well, yeah.
So there was some dodgy effect shots in this. That stuck in my mind as I was watching it.
Yeah, I was going for the stuff underwater because that's clearly where the money was set.
Sure, yeah,
like
for sure.
This flying stuff was like, yeah, okay, we technically need to show it in the air for 5 seconds, but we're not going to put a budget to it.
Like, I would... It looks worse from a realism perspective than that bad, like, coming out the cloud shot from the first airport. However, I probably still think there's more charm in the dodgy effects and the way that the plane's flying, like, behind these, like, sort of static clouds that look really... It looks like someone's like holding up cardboard clouds in the foreground as their model plane's flying behind them. But that aside, yeah, I think the pacing is a little bit weird. It definitely has sort of stops and starts. I do think some of the parts that should be more exciting are not that exciting. Like I actually think the third act's kind of dull, to be honest, for the most part. It didn't do too much for me.
I will say the third act suffers from a big old thing of, we are just going to show that the Navy is great. That's what the third act is. It's like a Transformers movie in the back half.
The marriage to Boeing is ended. Their new wife is the Navy, and the Navy must be made to look good and to be the most specialist thing of ever. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that going on. I think it's just... I think ultimately there's not much they can do with the premise once they're trapped underwater. There's a couple of interesting things, but what I was hoping was going to happen is some character dynamic stuff, which basically just got kind of like pushed to the side and ignored. And I did feel that they kind of wasted some potential with some of the things that they could have done with some of these characters. Yeah, because I mean the ensemble's fine. There's some characters that are clearly just sort of like, you know, B fodder for this woman kind of cares about this guy in the background, so you care a little bit if something happens to one of them. But you know, there's not much there. It's more the fact that, you know, there's a character who was a part of the hijacking who's still around, and it led to this disaster. There's so much that could have been done with like the social dynamics of interacting with that character, with the tension rising. If anything, like the physical threat in this movie of the disaster and like, oh, the water's eventually going to get in and oh, we're going to run out of air and all that stuff, obviously it needs to be there, but I almost felt like for this one, that should be just used as a platform to have this tense, like, you know, like, I almost want to say like 12 Angry Men style, like just characters trapped in a bottle and they're forced to try and the cabin fever, tensions rise. Like, could the disaster actually come from like that instead of the actual physical impending threat of everything else?
Yeah, the part that I was waiting to happen that never really did was something to do with the oxygen. I always thought, like, okay, you're at the bottom of the ocean, you have a limited amount of oxygen left, and I was waiting for it to start being like tensions start running high because they are almost out of air. And they mention that. They say how they're almost out of air, but nobody's like actually reacting to it. It's not a problem. It's just the timer, and no one's really doing anything about it.
Yeah, no, it barely feels like a concern. Like, yeah, they bring it up, but it never feels like, oh, it's getting hard to breathe. No one ever even says that.
Right.
like
but that's the sort of thing where, like,
here.
having it be in a bottled sort of episode, that's the kind of thing that, like, okay, we need to conserve oxygen. That dude tried to kill us all. Let's end him. That's one less space we have to worry about breathing.
Yeah, there's so many things like that they could have done with this, and it feels like they just didn't want to actually do any real character stuff, and what character stuff they try to do is a bit woeful in places. Now, I don't want to sound too harsh because I still generally had a decent enough time watching it. I like the setup felt a little bit different because it was a bit more organized. It was kind of like, you know, in the first movie it was one guy just walking in with a suitcase. This one it was like, no, a group of characters have a plan and they have to actually get past security and they have to actually enact a few things and set their plan up. It's almost exactly what the sort of thing I said that I was expecting to see in the first movie, but before I realized there was no airport security. So, you know, I think there's wasted potential here. There's some fun elements, but I don't think it's the best in the franchise, and I certainly don't think it measures up to its sort of like actual spiritual equivalent of like the Poseidon Adventure, where that is definitely the better underwater movie. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In terms of character stuff, I do agree entirely that most of the cast is mishandled. I will say that I think that there are a couple characters who have very good moments in terms of character development. Not like the entire length of the movie, but I think they are given just a little moment to shine. But the one that I do think was given a good amount of development is the pilot, the captain, Jack Lemmon, and his girlfriend, fiance. It's hard to define what their relationship really is.
It was girlfriend. He wants to become more serious, and she still wants to keep it casual because she's been divorced already. That's how this. Like every one of these movies, that's the consistent thing about all three of these. This is the one thing that's carried over from movie to movie. There's always a relationship that's on the brink of becoming more serious.
Yep.
That's been a consistent thing all three movies.
I'm just waiting for the Concorde, the final one, Airport 79, to just be, oh, hey, we're in a stable relationship and have been for the past 15 years. And it's like, wow, this is changing up the formula.
As stable as a Concorde is in the air.
Yeah. Turns out that's not that stable.
Yeah. I mean, I'll talk a lot bit more about this when we get into the spoilers, of course, but there was a lot more that I felt they could have done. It feels like it's just very thin in terms of like, oh, they're just here to be in danger. It's a group of characters to be worried about. In theory, I don't know how worried about most of them I actually really get.
Yeah, honestly, it's like less than 10 minutes long, but when the plane does finally end up like crashing, there's like a 10-minute section where it's just everyone going around checking on everybody. And because I didn't feel an attachment to those characters, those 10 minutes were the longest 10 minutes of this movie. Like, I was so bored. I'm like, okay, yeah, some people are dead, some people are injured. Can we just do something here?
Yeah, I could have. I think I could have been fine if that's where it started to pick up, where them having to jump into actions, what kind of made them likable characters. I mean, that can work, but it just never really developed beyond that. In all honesty, so yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk a bit more about that and the spoilers and whatnot. As far as anything else goes, you know, obviously the actual quality of the cast is fine. There's some very good actors in this. They're experienced.
Yeah, I would say nobody really stands out as giving a bad performance. It's just some characters are just more dull than others.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the boy, the kid, but I mean, he's a kid, so.
Yeah, he was fine for what I expect from a child actor. Like, he's not sitting there throwing out like, "Wow, mom, that sure was cool." Like,
I don't know.
Better than that.
I don't know, he kind of does, because when Jimmy Stewart's on the video and he's like, "Mom, who's that old man?" "That's your grandfather." "Have I met him? How big was I?"
Again, that seems more like writing than acting to me. I can't think of any way to deliver those lines and not sound like a total idiot.
Give Christopher Lee this kid's lines and we'll see how it sounds, because I bet you do.
Have I ever met that man?
"I'm already 80 years old and my grandfather's still alive. That doesn't make much sense."
That's just how old Jimmy Stewart is in this role.
Obviously, Christopher Lee's not actually that old yet, but it's still, again, he's one of those guys that just, he once he hit about 40, he just looked about 60 for the rest of his life until he was really, really old.
I know he's not the first, but I call that the Steve Martin syndrome.
Steve Martin.
It's just always Steve Martin, just when he got the white hair, he's just immediately old for the rest of his career.
No, it was, for me, it's Patrick Stewart. Like, you know, like, I mean, he looks a bit older now, but there was a long, long time where he still just looked the same like he did in Star Trek Next Gen. Like, you know, in those early X-Men movies, it had been 20 years and he still looked the same, because...
Man, kudos to those X-Men casting things. The only two people that have mattered that they keep on looking young throughout all the movies is Professor X and Wolverine, and they nailed it.
Oh dear. All right, spoilers, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I do want to just harp for a second on the special effects, though. Like, we talked about them, but I do think that all of the underwater shots, it was probably mostly miniatures, but without spoiling too much, they do some stuff in the back end of the movie that like shows that not all of it is definitely miniatures, or at least they nailed the green screen effects to put the miniature in the background and other stuff up front.
It's not a green. I mean, well, maybe in white we can see the whole plane, but like, no, they have scuba divers next to the plane. Like, there's clearly part of a plane that they've built, or you know, a shell that they've built for it to look like that.
Yeah, and it looks good. They put in the money, they made it look good. I'm happy to say that I believe there was a plane underwater. So kudos on that. Up in the air, a little bit different, but underwater, yeah.
I also think as it was getting into the water and there was like a shot looking out the window at the water, that looked a bit dodgy.
Okay, I can't remember that shot specifically, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it had a bit of a... I guess I'd compare it to kind of like a rear screen projection type thing where it just looks a bit like, oh, the angle of this isn't quite perfect, and...
Oh, okay, I see, yeah. I'm watching, I see it right now, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so... All right. Well, yeah.
But that being said, they also do exterior shots of the plane hitting the water, and that looks good. Like, that looks like a solid, like, crash landing.
I mean, that's definitely a miniature, that one. Like, those shots are definitely miniature, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But they make it look good, as opposed to plane coming out of fog.
All right. Well, we'll do spoilers, because I really don't think there's too much more to it's not a movie with a message or themes or anything like that.
The message is join the Navy. Go join the Navy. That's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a caption at the end that says, "The events of this film are fictional, but the rescue efforts of the Navy were real."
Like, God bless you.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's funny because obviously there's like a pretty obvious just sort of through line setup to this, but I don't know if it's that interesting just to go through it beat by beat, because it's pretty much like, yes, there's planes traveling with some passengers and a bunch of expensive things for a museum that this guy has built, because Jimmy Stewart likes to collect things. He's a really nice old rich man, even though old rich people aren't typically that nice, but in this movie he is.
This is Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart can't have a mean bone in his body.
Of course.
This was one part of the movie that I found kind of weird, is that having all of these rich people and this, like, all these heirlooms and priceless artifacts, it makes sense for why the hijackers show up.
Yes.
But once the hijackers crash, it doesn't matter. I kind of wanted there to be, from, like, on the back end, I mean, just give me, like, the pencil pusher, the bean counter in the back, who's not worried about the people surviving as much as the Van Gogh that's sitting there at the bottom of the ocean
blood-sucking
right now.
lawyer, yes.
Right. Yeah, just give me that guy, so that way we can have a little bit of conflict that involves all of these priceless artifacts.
Yeah, maybe there's like one in particular that's super like important to someone, and they try and like save it and end up dying as a result, or there's something, I don't know, something like that.
Anything, yeah.
Yeah. Like no one gave a. I mean, which is the right attitude, to be fair. Is the funny thing is that you shouldn't give a shit about this. They're just paintings. What was funny though is that when they were sort of unloading the crates with the paintings off the plane, I laughed because for a second, like, I forgot what the cargo was going to be, and I went, "That's weird. That looks like a flat screen TV box," because of the shape. And I was like, "That doesn't make any sense. It's 1977."
That's how much in the future we were back then.
So yeah, I mean, there's kind of a weird thing here. Yeah, like you say, like the guy dresses up as the pilot.
Well, as far as I can tell, he is actually the pilot, isn't he? Or is that the other guy?
No, it's the other guy. It's the guy who's running around the plane doing stuff. That this is.
Gotcha.
Because he gets past security in his pilot's uniform, and then he changes into his like maintenance uniform. And badge, and he kind of like alters his appearance by putting on like a fake mustache, and
he does the Brando in Godfather. He puts the stuff inside his jowls to make himself look larger.
To be fair, like that's actually a good detail for a disguise because it does kind of change the shape of the face. So
yeah, absolutely.
It adds to it. Puts on a wig.
He put on the wig, and I was like, "That's the same hair color, buddy. You couldn't make that part different."
It's got a bit more volume, I guess.
Yeah, slightly better bangs.
But yeah, But I don't think I understood why he needed this extra disguise, because once he's on the plane, like sabotaging things, he's clearly meant to be there as one of the caterers or engineers or whatever.
Right.
So. I guess that's it. I guess it's like he could only sneak around as an engineer as a disguise because his official role in the plane was one of the caterers, because he was like, serving drinks and,
right,
doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, it struck me that he only needed, like you said, when he's sneaking around on the plane, and I'm assuming you're talking about before takeoff.
Yeah, when they're putting the gas canister out of the little pipe or hose.
Yeah, it seems like that was just because, that was the outfit that the people loading up the plane were wearing. Yeah. So in order for him to be around in that area, he had to be dressed like that, because a caterer wouldn't be there at this point.
It's sort of thing where it goes out of its way to make him the memorable one that we'll keep noticing, because he's got a couple of other people that are helping him on the plane, but he's the one that you remember and recognize. So I get it from that perspective, but at the same time, I almost feel like all of this, like him getting into the disguise and going on to do this, is actually just kind of messy when you could have just had the other maintenance guy who helps him do it on his own and have it be his partner did that part. He's stuck the box with the gun or whatever it is past security as a pilot, and that's all you need.
It kind of just feels like they wanted to do the disguise scene to show, like, see, we're doing an Ocean's 11. We don't even know what that is yet, but we're doing it.
No, they wouldn't know what that is yet.
Oh, that's right. There is the original. I forgot that one existed.
Definitely the 50s or something like that,
Yeah, never mind. Although I'm not sure if that one did all the disguise work as the updated one did.
I mean, I don't know, but they know what an Ocean's 11 is.
That's fair.
So, yeah, I mean, movie set up, passengers are coming on. Some of the notable passengers is, so you've got the rich man's daughter, right? Played by Kathleen Quinlan, who I don't know from anything, I don't think, but I recognize that name for some reason. She's with her son. The son hasn't met his grandfather since he was so young that he can't remember it. And she's like, I'm only coming. She seems to know because the main lady we kind of get to know, Jack Lemmon's a girlfriend who's like high up in the airline. She's like, she runs everything for the boss, right? She's kind of like the I don't know, VP or whatever shit. Anyway,
Yeah.
but she clearly knows the daughter and welcomes her on and says, "Oh, it's great that you're coming to see your dad." Blah blah. She's like, "I'm only coming for my son to see his grandfather, and that's all it is." And we find out much later in the movie the reason why Jimmy Stewart's especially excited that they're coming and that he's going to get to see them is that VP lady, what's her name? Eve.
Yes.
Eve informs the daughter when she's complaining again about having to see her shitty dad and like, "Oh no, I'm just his daughter. I'm never my own person." She's like, "Your dad's dying. He's only got 6 months to live. Let him meet his grandson."
I love the way the scene is like structured, because she's basically saying like, yeah, but like I'm never gonna see him again, and like this is the last time. And she's like, okay, but like don't tell him that, because like could you just wait like 6 months? That's all you gotta do. Just and she's trying to like dance around the topic and then just straight up says like, yeah, he's dying. He's straight up dying. Please don't be a bitch. Please just let him have this.
Yes, give him a happy day or two, and then you can go about your life. You'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And you stand to inherit a lot of money, might we add? So keep your mouth shut.
Whoops! All the money was on the plane. Never mind.
There's always money in the banana stand.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So that's kind of their thing. Honestly, obviously, there's a little bit where like she's scared for her son's safety. The only noble thing about the son is that there's a scene where he gets excited by like the security guard who's on the plane, and the security guard's kind of nice to him and says, "Yeah, I'll tell you about how I used to catch bad guys later." And then the security guard gets killed by the hijackers, and I think that scene was just an attempt to make you like the security guard because he was nice to the kid. So
I'd say 50-50. The other half of it is he's the one who exposits that all of these cabins are like air pressurized or whatever.
Oh, sure, but anyone could have delivered that exposition.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But he's saying it in a way that a child could understand. Yes. So they had him talk to the child.
Yes. But that was pretty much his thing. There's like an older lady who's very friendly with everyone and runs like a business, and she plays poker with the guys who are sitting having a poker game. And
apparently there's a bunch of like art critics are also on board because they were invited to the party, and she's like, she runs a business that has something to do with up and coming young artists, and she like chastises the critics like, "Oh well, I'm not going to hold it against you." She
chastises one critic who she specifically points out. But her main thing throughout the movie is that she runs into an old flame. And this is the actor from Shadow of a Doubt that I recognize, Joseph Cotten. And like this is like a good example of one of the things in this movie that just is absolutely nothing, because it's like they meet and they go, "Oh, it's so nice to see you again." And he's like, "Yeah, I've been keeping busy. I collect my own heirlooms. Like, hey, I'm bringing like a present for the museum opening." And he reveals this expensive diamond necklace or whatever it is, and she's like, "Oh, it's beautiful." And then they hold hands, and then there's basically nothing with them for the rest of the movie except for the fact that when they're in, danger later, they're holding each other's hands. Like they're just now a pair. It's like these are the two that care for each other, and that's it. The only other thing is that there's a woman who gets hurt during the crash landing that she kind of looks after throughout the movie, and at the end that woman dies, and it's heartbreaking for her. But
whenever I said there were characters that have like one good moment each, that moment where she realizes that the other woman is dead, it felt like a strong moment. She delivered the scene well. Kudos. But there was nothing else in between there. It was just that moment.
No. Because I thought when they introduced this like old flames like reuniting thing, I was like, okay, there's a little subplot, and I expect at least 2 more follow-ups. I expect like she's going to be scared at one point, or maybe he's going to be scared, and the other one will console them, and maybe they'll reminisce about why they lost contact or something.
Do you remember London? Do you remember us dancing down the streets?
Do you remember the stars that night in Paris? And, some kind of thing where, maybe you put one of them in jeopardy later on, and, maybe one of them dies, maybe one doesn't, but, like, because at that point you've established that they really care about each other, that's why you care. But to be honest, I felt like those later parts of that subplot just never came.
Yeah, this is something I've noticed across all of the different disaster seasons we've done, is a lot of times they'll have this thing of maybe not like an old flame or whatever, but an older couple, and they will be around, but it never seems to be a thing where there's a lot of focus put on them. They're just there to be, wouldn't you feel bad if the elderly couple who just found romance gets killed? Wouldn't that be awful? Get invested.
I'm remembering the Ernest Borgnine talking about how he got his prostitute wife off the street when he was a cop, and oh god, what a speech! What a speech!
Exactly my point.
There's a blind man playing piano, singing, doing Stevie Wonder. Yep.
Yes, he was blind. Was I supposed to immediately recognize that from the glasses? Because I kept bouncing back and forth between, was that just style? Was that him trying to pull something off here?
I think that's specifically a blind person's glasses.
All right.
And he's singing a song, ironically, about beauty being in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what confused me is that there's a lady in red sort of standing at the piano, staring very intently, like she's, swooning, she's falling for him, right? And I thought, oh, this is the first time they've met. She's like excited by this guy's voice. She's maybe she's even like, oh, he's a little bit vulnerable, and I want to take care of him. Now that kind of the instinct kicking in, and she's sort of like staring at him all lovingly. But later on, right during the crash landing, his piano like crushes him against the side of the plane, right?
Right.
And when everything calms down, and like she's sort of like sitting with him afterwards and holding his hand, they know each other's names, and he says, "I love you, Julie." And I went, wait a minute. You two already knew each other? I thought this was the first time you met, the way she was looking at him. That was not we've been a couple for years. Like, a look. That was oh, I think I like him kind of look.
Look, in your dying moments, sometimes you just say things, and like, why not? Sure. Because you're right. It seems like this is the meet cute going on here. And then the next time they talk, it's, I love you.
All right. So now we'll talk about Christopher Lee, Christopher Lee's wife, Karen, and also Christopher Lee's like partner or business partner who he's doing work with, who apparently Karen has had a bit of an affair with, and he feels guilty about it, and that felt like it was setting up a plot. And I swear, did this guy die in the crash or something? Because I swear I didn't see him for the rest of the movie.
I think so. He is so like, you say that everyone here has like their own stuff going on, and like you were saying that the one hijacker was visually distinct. Like we were paying attention to him, we know what he looks like. This is the antithesis of that.
Yes.
Where I swear to God, this man could blend into like a neon background. I don't know how he would do it, but he's that see-through.
It was because the whole thing is it sets up Karen's a little bit tipsy. And she goes to find her husband who's in like this office area. It's a really weird plane. We're going to because we're basically describing rooms you wouldn't think about being on a plane, but it was an office, right? They go into this office.
They literally say like, oh, okay, here's the cabin area, which mind you has like all these love seats and like fold out chairs and games. It's super luxurious. But then like upstairs is an office. Downstairs is the galley. There's bedrooms and the nose and the tail of the plane. Like they have everything here that makes this luxurious.
And the cook has a chef's hat on.
Yes, of course. How would you know he's a cook without it?
Yeah, exactly. So we meet her, and she's tipsy. She goes to the office where he is, and he's like finalizing something with his business partner. And she starts complaining, like, oh, you two are busy with your hobby. That's so nice. And Christopher Lee turns and says, we're trying to figure out a way to harvest more food from the oceans to save millions of lives. I'd hardly call that a hobby. And I'm like, whoa. And then she goes, I've got a hobby of my own, darling. I found these little bottles of booze. I'm collecting them. And she's basically just like wanting attention. She's belittling everything he's saying. And he's clearly tired of this. This is not a new thing. And he insists that he doesn't want to have a drink with her. And he leaves the room. And that's when her and the business partner, she basically blackmails him to say, hey, if you don't have more sex with me when we land, I'm going to tell my husband about the sex. So he's like, but I don't want to. You treat me so badly. This is so weird. Like, the man she's having an affair with is like, you're cruel to your husband. Be better to him. He's a good man.
I genuinely believe that, like, he met her at a party and flirted with her. She went for it. And then he got to know her and was like, oh, God, what have I done?
Yep. And the next time we see Karen here, she comes into the main cabin area, and Christopher Lee at this point is standing at the piano listening to the pianist, and he's talking to the lady in the red, and he's not flirting. He is just talking about his love of scuba diving, which comes up later. But he's talking about his love of scuba diving, and he's really into it, and he's just socializing. Mm-hmm. And Karen comes up, sees this young woman in red standing next to him, and says, "Hey, move your ass." Mm-hmm. And she's just like, So she leaves, and Christopher's like, that was cruel, darling. And so this sets them up. And then once the disaster actually happens, and once they're underwater, which by the way, I was waiting the whole movie for Christopher Lee to turn out to be the bad guy who'd arranged all this, and it never happened. I was expecting him to make a villainous turn for some reason.
I mean, he comes off with that sort of... It's weird, because he does do heroic things, but like, everything I know about Christopher Lee is, no,
yes,
you
villain.
Should not be doing that.
So the whole thing is that she gets jealous because he's trying to help people who are injured, and is saying, "You should be taking care of me. I'm your wife, damn it." And it's like, oh my god, someone snuff her out right now,
I was going to say, are we okay yet with just like killing random women for no reason in these movies? Like, are we up to fridging yet? Can we do fridging?
I don't care what type of box it is, just put her in one.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, she's kind of villain seems, it's not even quite antagonist either. It's more...
It's just the selfish character.
Yeah.
It's the one who's more concerned about themselves than the greater good of everyone else surviving.
And I'm thinking, look, her arc to actually being a better human by the end better be satisfying. And would you believe that the movie had no interest in doing such a thing? In fact,
if anything, she doubles down. Yeah.
Yeah, she gets worse. Because the whole plan later on in the movie to try and get out of the plane, because no one knows where they are, because the hijackers flew them off course, they're underwater.
To the Bermuda Triangle, which I thought was going to be a whole thing, but they were like, no, planes go missing there all the time, whatever.
It's just a bit of fun, really.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, hey, we have to get this beacon device up in the raft, right? And it's all fine, but it means we have to open the door and go out. And Jack Lemmon's going to do it. And Christopher Lee says, "Hey, I'll go with you. I'm an experienced scuba diver. I know what I'm doing. 2 people are better than 1. You know how to work that thing, but I know how to get you to the top safely." And he's like, "You know what? All right, we've got one more mask and like a float. Put it on." And Christopher Lee dies immediately.
Yes,
like he's comically.
It's this whole thing where the door's not opening because the electronics are shut. So we have Jack Lemmon. He's like, "All right, let me take a look at the electronics. Don't touch anything." And Christopher Lee just goes over to the door, starts finagling with something. And of course, the moment Jack Lemmon notices and says, "No, wait," door busts open. Flooded by water, Christopher Lee's knocked out and is immediately drowned.
Yeah, he gets hit in the face with the door because the pressure just whooshes it into him instantly. Yeah. And then his dead body floats out the plane, and everyone can see it going past the window. So Karen sees Christopher Lee just floating up, and I'm like, you got Christopher Lee in this movie. You gave him this plot where it felt like, oh, he's an experienced scuba diver. I can see how that's going to become important. And then he doesn't even get to use his expertise. He is dead before the water comes in.
Honestly, I would have been more okay with it if it didn't feel like it was just doing it for the sake of like shock value, Yeah, and
that's what it feels like. It feels like, hey, big name dies. It's Drew Barrymore at the start of Scream. That's what this is.
Right, and like if they say it and it's just like, oh god, he's dead. Okay, we have to deal with this. Like that's a whole thing. Fine, whatever. But instead, the only person who really gives a damn is Karen, and I hate Karen. Yes. So I feel like it's like, well, you know what? You kind of wasted that. That kind of sucks.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know if I'm two minds, because on the one hand, it's like, yeah, it's genuinely shocking, and maybe it's actually more surprising that he doesn't accomplish anything, that his expertise isn't used at all before he dies. Like, maybe that does make it more shocking. But then part of me is also like, yeah, but that also means that, like, we set him up. We spent this time establishing things, and none of it mattered, really.
No, and even then, you say establishing things, like, yes, they established that he was a scuba diver, and that seems like it would be important, but at the same time, what else did he do?
Well, I don't even just mean that, though. I mean, even just the process of him volunteering, saying he can do it, like, saying his goodbyes to his wife, and, like, sort of, like, pretending that it's going to be a big deal, pretending that he's about to, like, be important, and that this is his time to shine, only to be snuffed out immediately, it's funny. I don't know if it's good, though.
Yeah, it's... I agree that it's shocking. I think that it is there for the shock, but that doesn't inherently make it a good thing. Like, it is something that I didn't see coming, but there's a lot of things I wouldn't have seen coming. That doesn't mean that they are narratively fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if like, a polar bear just sort of started drifting past the windows, that'd be surprising.
If
but
all of a sudden J.J. Abrams started directing this movie and just like, oh, look, a smoke monster. Like, yeah, I'd be a little confused.
Yes, that's no shade towards Lost, by the way. I quite enjoy Lost, but
Oh, that's fine. But I'm saying it has a time and a place, and it's not here.
So yeah, and Karen's stuff beyond that is that she's just so depressed and distraught that her husband's gone that at one point she decides to try and kill everyone by opening the hatch.
In fairness, she's not viewing it as I want to kill everybody.
No,
she's
but
viewing it as I don't want to go on.
Yes, but it will kill everyone else. Like the selfish part is absolutely there, where she's like, I want to die. I'm going to flood this place full of water, and like it's actually Eve has to go up and like struggle with her, and then eventually slap her in the face. And to be honest, that slap in the face might be the crowd pleasing moment of the whole movie.
Absolutely, but there is still that part of me that I'm like, look, if she wants to die, let's like just put her in a place where she's more likely to, and then something could happen to the plane, and there we go.
Yeah, luckily though, she does drown at the end of the movie.
Yes. To be fair though, it took me a minute because, like, yes, they showed her body, but it's face down in the water. I couldn't tell at first that it was her.
It was the rings on her hands, I think, that gave it away.
But that takes like 3 or 4 shots to get there. Instead, it just like it shows her body at first, and then her hand comes in on like the 3rd shot.
Yeah. So yeah, that was those characters.
Yeah, pretty much. That's her entire everyone Karen touched died.
Emmett Walsh is I mean, honestly, he's just there playing poker. It's not until after the crash where the captain goes, "Wasn't someone here a doctor?" And he's like, "Yeah, me." And he starts checking on wounds and people who are unconscious and whatnot. Yep. And that's it. He's not really got a character. He's just the doctor.
I'm sorry, I can't remember which one he was. There was a character who I think was this guy who admits later on, like, hush, hush, I'm not actually a doctor. I'm a veterinarian.
Yeah,
but let's just keep that on the down low. And that's all he does. That is literally his entire
honestly, to be fair, if I was in a situation like this and we said, is there a doctor? And someone said, well, I'm a vet. I'm like, hey, it's close enough. You know how to like patch up a wound.
Well, I love the way he clarifies that he's a vet. He says, like, I'm a vet. I take care of Mr. Stevens' horses in his stable. And I'm like, my first thought in my mind is like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. You know, a veterinarian, that would easily apply. But the moment that he said that I take care of horses for Mr. Stevens, I imagined him looking at the one guy who broke his leg and just being like, well, he's no good.
Yeah, I mean, again, that guy that broke his leg is the bartender. Like, the one thing we get for him is that, his wife is pregnant with twins. They're on the way.
Everything is lip service for why should I care about this person once things go bad? But then they don't actually develop any of them. They're just, see, we told you had a wife and kid. That's enough.
Yes. And it's not even like later on he references the fact that he wants to see his kids be born or anything like that, as he's like, scared of dying. It never comes up again, but they mentioned it once. Literally
all he does is just yelp in pain as people keep on bashing against his leg accidentally.
Yeah, I have to imagine for a lot of these actors, it wasn't that fulfilling of a movie to play in, because they don't really get to do much.
I still, trivia-wise, I think it was Christopher Lee only signed on to this just so he could work with Jack Lemmon. And Jack Lemmon said that doing this movie was a mistake. So...
yeah. Now, admittedly, there's been a stunt bubble for a lot of the scuba stuff, but I still assume he had to get pretty wet anyway.
Oh, yeah. Apparently, in preparation, he did actually go to a flight training school because he at least wanted to know, like, when he was flying the plane, what knobs and stuff he was looking at. And I can only assume that he signed into that training school before he realized he'd only be flying for about 10 collective minutes of the movie.
Yeah. Hey, dedication. You have to admire that.
I'll always admire an actor willing to go the extra mile, but that seems like a waste of time.
Yeah. It'd probably be easier just to like get an actual pilot to come in for like literally half an hour and just be like, this is the things I pressed during takeoff, and that's all you need to know. Just vaguely press here and here, and you're good.
Yeah. Reach up here, press down there, and then while you're flying, if that dial ever turns red, you're screwed. All right, bye.
Okay, we saw the women in the last movie get the lessons on the fly. No pun intended.
And she seems super calm about it. I'm sure it would be easy to teach someone that fast otherwise.
It was a very tense situation. I'm not saying people should learn when they're in a disaster.
Fair enough. Oh, apparently, sorry, I just saw that this movie, Airport 1975, and The Concorde were all inducted into the Razzie Awards Hall of Shame.
Oh.
I don't know if this one really deserves that much. I think it, I'd say 75 possibly, but I think this one.
I think we've got an extra rules catalogue that the Razzie people should probably take a look at if they think these are the bottom of the barrel. But to be fair, the Razzies have always been a bit more like the worst of like the ultra mainstream as opposed to the real bottom of the barrel stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that like Sylvester Stallone is just constantly up there. It's like, look, I've seen worse actors than Sylvester Stallone. I could tell you that much.
Oh, for sure. So, yeah, other characters. There's a guy who's like, I don't know if he's like the engineer of the plane, but he's kind of like the second guy who seems to know stuff in the plane. He's friends with the captain. He gets his arm hurt during the crash.
Yeah, I feel like he's the flight navigator guy in the cockpit at the beginning.
No.
No, that's someone else?
No, because when the plane lands at the start, after the opening titles, which, by the way, the opening titles were some of the biggest opening titles I'd ever goddamn seen. It was like it was made for people who are Jimmy Stewart's age. No, he meets him up when he gets off the plane and walks and talks with him out there.
Okay.
So he wasn't on the plane at the start.
Fair enough. No, I wasn't saying at the plane at the start. I was thinking on this secondary flight.
No. He was never like in the cockpit. He was always kind of in the back doing stuff. Because he was the one.
Yeah, I don't know who he is then.
Yeah, he was the one that was with the security guard when they're talking to the kid, for example.
Right. I don't know his job. I just don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
I guess engineer would be right.
Yeah, it clearly works for the airline. I just don't know exactly what the job role is. But he seemed to be in charge to an extent.
Well, later on when they're working with the electrical systems to get everything figured out, he's the one who's like able to point out everything. He's like, there's the circuit, that's the stuff. So it seems like that would be his job.
Yeah. And then is that? Well, I guess we mentioned Eve, but I guess we should probably actually say just kind of early on, her and Jack Lemmon share a intimate moment. She's got a job offer. In fact, wasn't there a couple in the first movie where literally the woman had a job offer for a different airport?
This movie said inspired by the airport movie, which was then written by the novel by whoever. Like, I have to assume that was just to say we're going to recycle some pieces from the first movie again. Yeah. Because that was exactly what happened. That
credit did make me laugh because, like, these days, all they would say is based on characters or events from the novel. They wouldn't say, oh, this is based on this movie, which was based on this book, which is effectively what this credit was.
Inspired by the film Airport, based on the novel by Arthur Haley.
Yes, yeah. It's like overly specific, and I don't think that you have to be that specific. You just say, just say the true source material. The earlier movies are relevant.
Look, as long as Arthur Haley gets his name in 72-point font, like, he's cool. You can say whatever.
72. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, just to go back to the plot, because we kind of I wanted to just jump around top of the characters because it's just easy to get all their stuff out of the way first. The plan of the villains is that they gas the plane, right? They have to knock out the security guard to get their thing going, but they gas the plane so that all the passengers go unconscious, so they never panic, they never know. And to be fair, it doesn't seem like they're evil in the sense that they never want to actually kill the passengers. They actually didn't mean to kill the security guard. He's kind of like, oh, I hit him too hard, he's dead. Well, oops, I guess.
Yeah, they crash a bottle over his head, and then they start tying him up, and then the other guy's just like, dude, you killed him. Don't bother.
He's like, oh dear. And they lure the captain out of the cockpit and knock him out. But it's the plan seems to be we're going to fly to this island that's not really used for anything, and by the time all these people wake up, we'll be gone with all the good stuff. And because the plane will have radios and stuff, they can just call for help. relatively speaking, they weren't doing anything. I mean, it's bad, but they weren't trying to kill everyone.
Look, we're looking at like a bunch of felonies, but none that are going to cost people their lives. So, is it really that bad?
Unfortunately, though, the main guy, who's not the guy that would fall sneaking out of the plane and putting the mustache on, the main bad guy, I would say, is the co-pilot. He's the one that turns out to be the main kind of head honcho, and he's the one luring the captain out and all that and whatever.
Yeah, they get the captain out by saying that there's a sick passenger in the back, so he's out of the cockpit. The guy in the cockpit takes care of the flight navigator while the captain's knocked out by, I think, the caterer. Yeah,
something like that. So, yeah, the problem is, though, is the co-pilot ends up being shit at flying planes.
Well, all right. So I think this was a very poorly shot sequence, but reading it on Wikipedia, it makes sense to me.
Okay.
Is that as they are leaving, as they are going off their flight plan, they have to stay really close to the ground to not be picked up by radar.
Yeah.
So they're staying like literally...
I've heard that from other movies, so I'm following that so far.
Yes. So they're like right above the ground. There's a fog bank that was mentioned earlier on. They did say that there was fog rolling in. And they just so happens
just to clarify here, you say close to the ground, it's actually close to the water, because they're over water.
Sorry, close to water level. Yeah. But it just so happens that in this fog is an oil driller. It's a giant offshore rig. And so he has to do super deep maneuvers to avoid it. He ends up crashing the plane and they sink to the bottom. So it makes sense that he wouldn't know that's there, because why would an airline pilot have to keep track of where oil drillers are? But like, yeah, it's not shot well. It's not a very well shot sequence.
Yeah, it feels like it just kind of like surprises him in a way that feels, I don't know, it feels a bit odd. But I mean, yeah, they give them a reason to be flying so low, but it just, yeah, it felt a bit weird in the moment. But the wing hits it. One of the engines starts to go and, like, you know, gets a bit fiery. Some of the passengers, or not the passengers, but one of the hijackers is looking out the window going, "Oh shit, Jesus Christ, oh no, that does not look good." And by the time they crash, all of the hijackers except the co-pilot die in the chaos, and the co-pilot is injured. And I think what I was excited about going forward in the movie at this point is that once everyone wakes up and the captain wakes up and he's checking on everyone, he eventually gets to the cockpit and he finds the co-pilot unconscious, but he's still alive, and there's a gun in his waist, and that's kind of what tells him that, oh, you did something here. You're responsible for something here.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, get this asshole in the office and like keep an eye on him. And when they say he wakes up, I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. I'm really excited to see like this conversation. And it kind of just cuts to the end of the conversation where he's like, and is that everything? He's like, yeah, that's everything. He's already confessed to like everything that's happened. And I'm like, I actually kind of would have liked to see the scene where he realizes there's no point in like lying or trying to weasel his way out of it, because they've crashed. Like, regardless,
at the bottom of the ocean.
Either he's going to die, or he's going to be rescued and arrested. When help comes. So there's like no reason for him not to. But I really thought that this idea of him being responsible for all of this happening, that his betrayal as a pilot and doing this to them, even though it wasn't the intention, he still caused it. I was expecting like other characters to like find out. Like I was kind of expecting the captain to turn to one of the others and say, "Keep this between us," because they can't, like, all these people who are scared and like tensions are running high. They can't know that there's someone to blame, because that'll get bad. And I almost thought there was going to be a moral thing of like, oh, some of them are going to have to try and protect them from like the mob who want to kill him for putting them in this situation, or something. Something where. And then you just never see him again. You see like a couple of reaction shots when big things are happening, and then at the very end, you just see that he's died when it was flooding, just before they lifted the plane up. So it's like, he's just gone. So.
Yeah, no, it's super disappointing. I don't know, when I was watching it, I don't know what I was really wanting, but hearing you say the 12 Angry Men in here, like, that is what I would hope for. It doesn't even have to be that level of like, well directed, well.
Oh, of course, yeah. I just mean very broadly the idea that there's like a debate, that those tensions run high. It's.
Yeah, you spend all this time introducing the characters, and I mean every disaster movie does that, but you spent the time introducing them. I think that there is room for them to talk to each other, you know? Instead, this is, how is Jack Lemmon gonna do his thing? Like, it's all focused on his actions, and everyone else is kind of just the fodder that makes it worthwhile to do.
Yeah. And ultimately, the actions aren't that interesting in the middle of the movie, because it's mostly just assessing the damage. It's not really until we're at the point where the Navy are saying, okay, how do we actually get them out? Because that is an interesting question, is how do you get these people out of this plane safely? What do you do?
This is also where we get the Petroni showing up.
Petroni has a couple of scenes where he's talking about, I know that plane, I know the pressure points, damn it.
And there's specifically like, okay, so you're going to hop on the helicopter, you're going to head out there, right? And he's like, no, I'm going to stay here. I think I could do better here, but good luck.
And I'm like, that almost feels like it wasn't a scripted moment. This is just them asking George Kennedy to go do some more scenes in a different location, and he's like, no, I'll do better here.
I'm sorry, I signed a contract for 2 filming days, and wouldn't you know it, we're at the end of the second one. Bye-bye.
I think 2 has been generous.
Probably, yeah.
Hey, you got to have a scene with Jimmy Stewart. I'm sure that was nice for George Kennedy. I'm sure he looked up to him. Very
Absolutely.
Nice. I mean, if all the character things that just get thrown away or they don't do anything with, I think the co-pilot being the perpetrator and him still being alive and them doing nothing with them, having him kind of, not captive, but like having him, as a prisoner.
I mean, I honest to God, I think the hijacking as a whole is just a wasted opportunity. Like, you could have any reason for this plane to go under the water. You can, whatever it is, weather, anything like that, malfunction. Making it a hijacking comes with certain connotations of a crime has been committed, and therefore there is something to play off of that. But they just chose not to. It may as well have just been struck by lightning.
No, you're right. Because, like you say, they don't do anything with the loot itself, right? Which I think is the lesser of the two. But like, if they did something with that, that'd be something. And they don't do anything with the fact that they've got the one who betrayed them and did this hijacking in the first place. So because they don't actually do anything with either of those things, you're right. The reason for it going into the water is completely irrelevant for the entire second half of the movie. It does not matter at that point. When some growth, again, it doesn't have to be this, but another suggestion would be, the co-pilot does feel somewhat responsible and does something heroic as an act of redemption or something before dying, I don't know.
He could go do the Christopher Lee thing. Like, have him be like, look, I know how to scuba dive. I caused this, I can fix this. Or even just...
And that would be good as well, because that would be like, can we trust him? Like, they could actually question, like, do we trust him to do this? Maybe we don't have a choice because it's the only option we have, kind of thing.
Yeah. Like, we're not letting him go up to the surface with the radio beeper. He'll just say everyone down there is dead and won't let any of us out. Like, someone else has to go with them. And then you get into that sort of problem.
Yeah. Yeah, potential. There was potential for things here.
Yes.
Anyway, when they land in the water, there's a little bit of they wake up, they sort of see that they're at sea level, and then they sink down and land. And thankfully,
they all start waking up literally as the plane hits, and I'm like, how long was this gas supposed to keep them out for? Because it seems like not long enough.
Yeah, I don't. The jolt of the landing sped the process up, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they're lucky that they end up in a fairly shallow bit of, relative to what the ocean could be.
Yeah, there was one shot. I thought that they were a lot deeper than they were, but then there was one shot where it was just as Christopher Lee and them were going outside to do the scuba dive.
This is the bird's eye shot?
It's not the bird's eye shot. It's the shot from inside the plane after it's filled up with water, and it's super bright outside. Like, sunlight is just pouring in, and I was like, that's an 8-foot deep pool. You cannot tell me sun's reaching down to the bottom of the ocean, and it's still that bright.
Yeah, and obviously it's kind of teetering near the edge of the seabed where it's going to go deeper if it, slides off. But which is fine. Obviously, there's different levels of depth and all over the ocean. It's whatever. But it's there is that one shot when the helicopters are coming in eventually where you can sort of see the plane in the water from above, and it looks especially shallow at that point. Probably because they just wanted to have that effect of being able to see it.
I feel like this movie did a decent enough explanation as to why, but I do feel like they did a good job of, like, okay, we've got a bunch of elderly people, we've got a bunch of injured people. That's why we can't just open the door and tell everyone to swim. Like, if it's shallow enough, that should just be a feasible possibility.
I think it's the water rushing in and the pressure and all that is the problem. But you're right. Like once like the opening is there and like Jack Lemmon's swimming, it doesn't feel like it's that much of a strenuous thing, you know, relatively speaking, to just swim up to the surface.
Yeah.
So yeah. Obviously the Navy, he turns on the transponder, they get the beacon, the Navy mobilize, these ships come, they come and get him, and they start forming the plan, which ends up being to strap a bunch of balloons to the plane to make it rise up just long enough so that it's at sea level so they can get everyone out.
Yeah, like they've got hoses up on the surface of air that they pump down underneath and fill these things up so it'll bring up the whole plane, which makes enough sense. However, I would critique one thing, which is that as the balloons come up, surely they would only come up enough that the balloons would surface. So the plane would be still like 7 feet under the water.
Which would be better than at the bottom, but yeah.
But not what we saw.
It's not what we saw, no. Yeah, because they do discuss a little bit, like, oh, can we try and get them air somehow? And it's like, no, because we can't like make a opening in the plane. It just isn't going to happen. No.
This plane is literally about to fall apart. That's how we know it's not a Boeing.
Yeah, so because these straps go under, because they can't like drill things into the plane, so the straps go underneath and kind of lift it up like that. But yeah, so there's a whole like sequence where when it gets to the surface, Jack Lemmon's convinced like the captain of the ship that he's on to let him go scuba diving, because he knows the plane, he knows the stress points. If you put things in the wrong place, it'll break the plane in half, so I need to be down there.
Yes, which obviously he points out as he's under the water, all the different things that they're doing wrong, and he fixes, oh, what's that? He doesn't do anything. It's just so he can be in the final scene. Cool.
Well, he draws an X on the plane a few times.
Does he? I did not notice that.
Yeah, that was him. I think he was the one saying, hey, this is where you put the next strap. This is where you put this strap.
Fair enough. If he actually did that, then I am mistaken. But it definitely to me felt like, hey, you got to put me on this thing because I need to be at that plane when all those stuff goes wrong. Yeah.
Honestly, like the passengers were, you know, like as the plane's coming up, it's when like everything's starting to properly break down and the water's rushing in. That's why a bunch of them do drown right at the ending. But they do get up to the surface, open the door. Navy gets them out onto some rafts, but they're very chaotic. They're all kind of tripping over each other, and it's, you know,
I think it's Eve. I could be wrong, but there is one lady who, like, I swear to God, she's not even trying. Like, they're carrying her off, and she's just like, oh, my legs. Oh, please carry me to the boat. And it's like, lady.
No, it's not Eve.
It's not Eve?
Of course it's not Eve, because she's
that's right. Eve's on the...
She's left in the plane last, and then she has to get out with Jack Lemmon at the last second.
Fair enough, yeah. There's some older lady. I didn't recognize her. It's probably just like a B-tier character, but, like, it's just... I was just moaning as she was coming out. Just like, oh, my God, come on.
Yeah, and part of me was thinking, look, you're at surface level, just all of you jump out as quickly as possible, because once you're out in the water, you can just float until they get you.
Yeah, you get the engineer guy, he's like, all right, here's the order of events. Injured, then children, then women, then men. And I'm like, how about injured in the boats, and then everyone who's closest to the door? Like, just go. What's the point of doing this, like, ordered thing here?
Yeah, just get into the water, because if you're into the water, I mean... Assuming you can, and if you can't swim, you know what, grab someone else who can swim and they'll keep you.
They're all wearing
afloat.
life vests too. Like, it's going to keep them afloat.
Because that was the thing, when Jack Lemmon went up and turned on the beacon, I went, oh, that's weird. He's just safe now. Because like he's in no danger anymore. He's out. He's up here. He's chilling.
He turns on the beacon and just sits back, catches some rays. No worries.
But of course, the plane starts to buckle and go down. Then
the balloons start like chopping, like they get hit on some scrap metal, so they all start floating up to the surface.
So he like sees Eve, who's just the last one who's not out the plane, get thrown back with water. So he dives in to get her, but now the plane's like, you know, sort of tipping. So he's like, hey, we have to get to the cockpit.
Titanic.
Yeah, it's the Titanic thing, yeah. We have to rush up to the cockpit because it will still be above sea level, hopefully. And yeah, it's just them running through the planes. It's filling with water and sinking. They get to the cockpit and jump out the window.
Now, I mean, we've rushed through that back half, but I will say, I think that everything from them starting to inflate the balloons to this last bit of jumping out the cockpit door. I think that all is a solid piece of tension and action, and it managed to keep me interested. And that's a good, like, 20, 30 minutes from there to the end. And, like, I was not sure who was going to live, who was going to die, because, again, with the water rushing in there, a bunch of characters that I would have otherwise considered safe did end up dying. So I think it does a solid job right up to the end, where I still don't know whether or not Eve is going to make it in those last moments. So kudos to that at the very least.
Yeah, I think you're maybe giving it a little bit more time than it actually had, because there wasn't that much time left of the movie when it got, because even when they started like setting the plan up, it felt like there was only maybe half an hour left. And I actually thought that was one of the slower stretches of the movie, is when it was just them going around like marking the X's and like the Navy were kind of talking. That part was slow.
That's what I'm saying. Right after that bit is where I'm counting.
Yeah, I was feeling that definitely some pacing issues there. It makes sense you want to end it with like the main character and like the person he cares about being in jeopardy. Like that's what they do. It was the obvious thing they were going to do, and they did. Yeah, it's fine. The movie ends with Jimmy Stewart hugging his grandson and being like, "I'm your grandfather."
It's literally the only thing he says. He just picks up the boy, just like, "I'm your grandpa." Oh, all right. Don't say anything to your daughter, who just survived that as well.
She knows who he is.
Yeah. Not just like, maybe that's why she hates him so much. It's just like, yeah, hey, Dad, I survived too, but no, he's your grandson, whatever.
Actually, there's a moment when like the guy running the show, the engineer guy, says, "Hey, this is the order, you know, injured and children and then women and whatever." And there's a guy who grabs the boy and says, "I'll take the boy." And I'm like, his mum's right there. His mum will take him. But you're like, no, he's my ticket out of here. I've got a kid.
Absolutely.
Let me out first.
Yeah. And that's the art critic who got chastised at the beginning. I have a feeling that it's one of those things where like the writer was like, my last movie got critic panned, and now I'm just saying critics are stupid.
This is Emmerich putting the Siskel and Ebert characters into Godzilla 98. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, there you go. And that's it. That's Airport 77. I don't think, for me, what I liked about 75, which is that there was actually a central character who had a bit of a growth, who felt like she kind of stole the show because she was the one who had to step up, and I got some genuine moments of tension out of that in the last movie. I don't think there's any character in this or any kind of like plot, like through line in this that ever measures up to what I liked in that last one. But it's not bad. I mean, compared to the first one, this, I think, had the potential to be a lot more fun, but while I do think the first movie lingers on a lot of the character drama, like, too much, everything's better directed in the first movie. Like, the actual tension of the guy getting on the plane with a suitcase, everything finally going down, the characters trying to de-escalate it, but obviously it's to no avail. I think all that stuff in the first movie is so much better directed than anything in this movie. This definitely feels like it's a bit more cobbled together as far as the script goes, and feels a lot weaker as a result. So I think ultimately I'm coming down on this being the weakest of the three.
I can see that. I understand where you're coming from with that. And I especially with how you enjoyed the second one. I think that the first one is still, in terms of like direction, tension, just pacing in general, I think the first one was significantly better. Obviously some sequences were a little bit strange, but beyond that, overall better product. This one, I think it just had a bit more... It had a bit more of what I was looking for in terms of these movies, and maybe it's just because the last one I was going into it expecting a certain type of movie. This one, I was giving this one a little bit more leeway of expectations, that I just view this one a bit more favorably. I'm not saying it's far and away like second one, third one a mile ahead of it. I think they're pretty tight, close together for me, but it is ever so slightly above the second one for me.
Yeah, it's just it's an interesting set of movies because they're so different in a lot of ways.
Now, I need to make you aware of this.
What?
Universal, as apparently was a commonplace thing at the time for their studio, the theatrical release exists. That's the version we watched. But when they put it onto network television, there was a full hour of more content that is added to the television. So just to give you an idea of things that come in here, a flight attendant does like a thing showing the escape slide, and Anne introduces the crew to Mr. Petroni. Petroni and Anne talk for a while. Petroni's got just a ton of more stuff here. He's canceling going to his son's graduation because of the 747 going missing.
Hold on. Just, I'll cut in here for a second. So what you're saying is, it's not that they had George Kennedy only on set for a day. They actually shot an entire subplot with him and decided, you know what? No, we're just going to take almost all of it out.
That goes for the television release. That's for the people watching it later on. We also get, and this is it's not descriptive as to what they were, but it says flashbacks of several characters, including Martin and Karen Wallace, that's Christopher Lee and wife, Steve and Julie, the singer and the red-dressed girl, Jane and Bonnie Stern, no idea who they are, and Lisa and Ralph Crawford. So characters did get more development.
That sounds like so much that it had to have been planned that they wanted to do like a longer version. That sounds like so much that I don't think it's just, oh, there's so much shit we're just going to cut out. Hey, we can do a longer cut later. This feels like an intentional like thing that
I
they
think
planned.
so. Yeah, I think it's a thing where they were like, okay, we got to sell this to network television and it needs to be longer in order to fit with like a certain time block or whatever. So here you go.
That is, that's very strange. I can't imagine that the pacing of that version is very good.
No, probably not. I mean, it would be a 3-hour long movie, and already we're saying how some scenes feel like, okay, you could cut that, but yeah, probably not the best cut. But apparently it's not available anywhere. It's just never been released officially. So if anyone has a pirated version of that, good luck.
I imagine... I mean, there's a chance that the reason why they've never released it again is because the extra scenes... Like, they've always preserved the theatrical version, and the extra scenes are in such a bad state that putting them back into the movie would they just don't look up to the same quality, so it's an unfeasible thing. You'd have to do something like the longer cut of Mad World, where there is a version, like the Criterion Blu-ray and stuff does have like this longer, like, supersized cut, but a lot of the extra scenes look like shit. And it's like, hey, here's a note at the start saying, hey, it's funny to see what these scenes were, but it's a very hodgepodge, unsatisfying thing as a movie.
Right.
So
yeah, I like to imagine that the only versions that are still left are ones where, like, you know, they're recording the television and you can still see the start and end of the commercials, like, just happening on either side.
But here's the thing, though, like, how many people had VCRs recording TV in, you know, the late 70s? Not many yet.
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, this would still be airing on TV channels in the early 80s. So,
I mean, it might have been, but I mean, if it's one of these things that's been just completely scrapped and lost to time, there's a good chance that, you know, they had a deal for like 2 years to air it a few times, and then, you know, it vanishes. And
I mean, at the very least, it exists in the enough of a form that somebody was able to transcribe what happens onto IMDb. So,
oh, there's probably I bet you there's a bootleg like TV rip somewhere. Yeah. Like probably. Someone, there is I bet it exists somewhere, but on the back, you know, the high seas, as it were.
Yes.
Anyway, all right. What was your scene of the movie?
I think my scene of the movie, unfortunately for the rest of the movie, I honestly think it is the sequence of the hijacker going through the airport and like putting on the disguises and moving about that way. I think that it just provides the most intrigue and interest that the movie unfortunately was not really able to keep up with. Obviously we talked a lot about before how the hijacking just ended up being a big nothing burger, but those opening scenes gave me a lot of promise, and I was really hoping this was going to be something bigger than it was.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what to go with here. Karen getting slapped, maybe?
Yeah. I will say second follow runner-up thing is Christopher Lee just getting bashed by that door, and like the 30 seconds to follow that.
That was funny. It wasn't good, but it was funny.
Right.
It was a poor choice, but it got a chuckle out of me. To be honest, a few of the things that happen when the plane first goes down did make me laugh. Like the piano crushing the blind man, I thought was a little bit funny. The lady gets hit in the head with like a suitcase or whatever it is that falls on her was kind of fun. It made me think of that moment in White Squall when the nurse lady or whoever she was in that movie kept getting hit in the head
Yes,
when
that's right.
the waves were hitting them.
Mm-hmm. When you were describing how the blind man was killed, like when you were describing his plot,
Yes.
you didn't mention that moment, but I laughed, so I seemed like a psycho in that. Just like it's like, and then he's killed, and I go, yeah,
Yeah, but that's the kind of movie this is. Where the quality is that I'm enjoying the unintentionally funny moments probably a bit more than I'm enjoying any of the actual attempts at things.
yeah. I couldn't even tell you who it was, but during the crash sequence, someone goes through a wall, and like it's just half a second. It's a very quick cut, but it's so funny to just see like, yeah, okay, just a random drywall crashing through. If only because I feel like I've seen that in every disaster movie that we've ever watched on this show.
Yep, that's fair. I don't know if anything tops the was it Avalanche, and it's like the kitchen when the avalanche is
Yes.
happening, and there's people like sliding down the counters and whatnot.
The sliding down counters, and then it cuts to that woman who's about to commit suicide, and the avalanche ends up killing her instead. Oh, I seem like such a psycho, but it was so funny.
It wasn't a good or fun movie for the most part, but God, some of those scenes around there were quite funny.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll go with Karen getting slapped, but I mean honestly,
right.
it's slim pickings. All right, MVP of the movie.
I mean, there's not a lot of choices. I think that Jack Lemmon does a great performance for what he's given. I think that he's by far and away the most interesting character in the movie.
He anchors it.
Else,
It feels like he's keeping a cool head, and he's
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And even then, when he gets angry, like the part where he's reacting to the hijacker getting caught, like it feels solid. It feels like a good, like angry beat for him. The part where he's going to save Eve, it feels like a desperate measure on his part. So no other characters developed even close to that amount or nearly as interesting. So I think just by default, Jack Lemmon's got to get it.
Yeah, I have to agree with Jack Lemmon. He's the only one that, admittedly, again, it would be nice if the confrontation with the co-pilot actually developed into something, but even just the hint of it was the most anyone was really given to do in this movie, so it's very easily him, I think. So,
that's hey.
Alright, rating of Airport 77.
So now I'm kind of wishing I put more of a gap between the first Airport movie and the second one, because I gave the first a 6 and the second a 5.5. So I don't really have room for this one. If I have to really ascribe it one, I think that this one for me is closer to the 6. I think that it's hard to say on par with the first one because it's not, but if you view that one as a very high, like a 6.4, this one's a 6.1.
You can have two things as the same rating, but have a preference for one over the other.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just saying the gulf there. It's a good 0.3 in there.
Okay. Yeah. This is a 5. This is a 5 out of 10. Like, and it's not like a tough 5 to watch. Like, it's an easy enough thing to have on the background. But I would not recommend it on its own. Like, it's a completion thing. You watch an Airport, you watch the franchise, sure. You're not going to be miserable that you watched it or mad about it, but it's not going to leave an impression.
That, or if you really want to convince somebody that the Navy is cool, there you go.
Yeah. And as for does this make the cut, I think this just dips into not making the cut compared to the other two.
See, I rated it higher than the last one, which we agreed was cutting it close. So I would make the argument for cutting it close, but I care so little about that argument that I'm just going to give it to you.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I was also a good bit stronger on the last one, and I have dipped down much lower, so...
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm willing to give it to you, but I do think if we're just keeping a record of what was said, I would make the very light argument for cutting it close.
Yeah. So hey, we'll see what Airport 79 the Concorde brings us next time.
If I'm remembering the Concorde correctly, not the movie but the plane itself, this is where the front of the plane can like droop. It like the cockpit is able to angle itself differently, and I cannot wait for that to be a plot point.
I remember people talking about Concords. I don't know if I ever actually really saw one or knew what it looked like, to be honest. Now that I'm looking at the poster for this next one and being like, oh yeah, it's got a bit of bit of a cartoon nose thing going.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so yes, very very different. Like I read the synopsis for this just here, and again, it sounds super different to the other ones. So yeah.
Looking at the cast, I'm not seeing a huge amount of notable faces, save for I see Sharo here, which is weird.
Yeah, I don't know who that is, but I do know who David Warner is. He's a character actor to I like popping up in things. And I know who BB Anderson is. In fact, you know who BB Anderson is.
I haven't scrolled that far down yet. Where's BB? Oh, sorry, not the letters BB. Got it. BB Anderson, what do I know her from?
She's in a lot of Ingmar Bergman movies.
Oh, all right, fair enough. I guess I wasn't expecting her to show up this late.
She died in 2019.
Did she? Wow. Here's the thing. The Ingmar Bergman films I have so separate in my mind as like having always existed. Like they're just eternal in their own right.
But like the movie we saw her in, I think she was in The Magician, at least, if not that and The Virgin Spring, maybe both. That was like 58 and 60. This is like 1979. No. It's not that much later.
You're absolutely right. But because of The Magician and Virgin Spring, like the time that they're set in, I just have them in my mind as like film was born and these things already existed.
And she like she must have been like in her early 20s in those movies as well. So she's probably only going to be like 45 in this next movie.
Yeah, probably.
So
look, it's entirely on I have no sense of time prior to like 1988 and after 2019. Everything there just blurs together.
I can tell. In Virgin Spring, she'd have been 25, 26 because she was born 35. So.
Well, she wasn't in Virgin Spring.
Oh, she wasn't?
No.
She's in The Magician then. She's definitely.
Yeah, she's in The Magician. Yep.
She's in Seven Seal. She's in Persona. She's in a bunch of Bergman movies.
All right, fair enough. Well, this is clearly the high point of her career, being in the Concorde.
Hey, she got promoted to Hollywood Drek away from the art house Bergman.
There you go.
And Joe, the sad part is she probably get paid more for this than she did for those Bergman.
Yeah,
movies.
probably. Also, I'm not familiar with the guy. Apparently, he starred in Good Times. Jimmy J.J. Walker. I'm only bringing him up because he's in Concorde, but he's also in Airplane. So
interesting.
One of the carryovers there.
That's interesting. And that's when was Airplane? That was like 1980. So Concorde's still pre-Airplane.
Yep, the entire airport franchise is pre-Airplane. So maybe everything that goes into Concorde will just be like, oh, hey, there it is. All
right, well, there you go. That's the Concorde. Well, that's next time is the Concorde. Yes. This has been Airport 77. And that'll bring an end to Airport season next week. And we got Bruce Lee season kicking off after that. So that should be fun. And of course, if you want to support the content over in Patreon, it helps us out if you do that. And you get some bonus shows every month as a result. Me and David specifically have two monthly bonus shows. One is where we do things from the Criterion collection called the Criterion Cut. And that's where we've done some of these Ingmar Bergman movies that we just referenced.
Yes.
So that's fun.
I promise I sound more intelligent in them than in here.
And then Extra Reels is the show where we review some of the worst things ever made. In fact, I referenced it earlier when I was joking about the Razzies. You know, we've done all sorts of famous Drek and some obscure. We've discovered some.
We've discovered that it turns out the bottom of the barrel is not where we thought it was.
I'm trying to think of like, so you have a diamond in the rough. That's not what we find in Extra Reels, but we find something in the rough. There's like,
this is the fool's gold. You think that you've got yourself a shiny gold nugget, and then wouldn't you know it?
Anyway, so if those sounds like fun, it's 2 monthly bonus podcasts. You can get them on Patreon, but that is the show. That is everything. So thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and in the what did I say at the end of this? Oh, if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.